Corporal Kim Tae-ho pulled at his stiff collar one more time, trying to make the ceremonial uniform feel less like a straitjacket. Through the small porthole of the transport shuttle, he could see the Veltharian mothership growing larger by the minute. The thing was absolutely massive, easily the size of a small city floating in space. Its surface wasn't smooth like human ships, but seemed to ripple and flow like it was alive. "Stop fidgeting," muttered Ambassador Park from the seat beside him. The older man looked just as nervous as Tae-ho felt, despite his years of diplomatic experience. "Remember, you're just there to look official. Don't touch anything, don't speak unless spoken to, and for heaven's sake, don't make any sudden movements." Tae-ho nodded, though his stomach was doing flips. 6 months ago, he'd been a regular infantry soldier stationed at the DMZ. Then first contact happened, and suddenly, everyone who looked remotely presentable in dress uniform was being shipped off to represent humanity. The Veltharians had been sending diplomatic signals for weeks, but nobody could figure out what they actually wanted. The negotiations so far had been a disaster. Every time the human diplomats thought they understood something about Veltharian culture, they'd accidentally insult someone or break some unknown rule. Last week, Ambassador Chen had apparently committed a grave offense by sitting down before being invited. The week before that, the entire human delegation had been asked to leave because someone wore the wrong color shirt. "These aliens are impossible to read," Park had complained during their briefing. "Their skin changes color constantly, they speak in musical tones, and they have more arms than we know what to do with. One wrong move and we could be looking at an interstellar war." The shuttle shuddered slightly as it connected with the docking bay. Tae-ho felt his ears pop as the air pressure equalized. The door hissed open, revealing a corridor that made his eyes water. Everything seemed to glow with a soft, pearl-like light. The walls weren't just metal, they pulsed gently like they had a heartbeat. "Stay close and follow my lead," Park whispered as they stepped out. The first Veltharian Tae-ho saw up close, made him stop in his tracks. The being was nearly 8 feet tall, with skin that shimmered like oil on water. Colors rippled across its surface, blues and greens and purples that shifted and changed as they watched. It had 4 arms, each moving independently but somehow in perfect harmony with the others. Its face was human-like but elongated, with large eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. "Welcome, humans of Earth," the Veltharian said, its voice like a gentle song. "I am Guide Rixtel. Please follow the path of light." As they walked deeper into the ship, Tae-ho tried not to stare at everything around him. The corridors were wide enough for 10 people to walk side by side, with ceiling that curved up into soft arches. Strange plants, if they were plants, grew from alcoves in the walls, their leaves glowing softly in patterns that seemed to respond to their footsteps. Other Veltharians moved through the corridors, each one unique in their color patterns and the way they carried themselves. Some had skin that sparkled like starlight, others showed deep, rich colors like precious gems. Their forearms moved in ways that seemed like dancing, reaching and gesturing in a constant fluid motion. "Their whole ship feels alive," Tae-ho thought to himself, running his hand along one of the walls when no one was looking. The surface was warm and smooth, with a subtle texture that reminded him of polished stone. The group turned a corner and entered what could only be described as a throne room, though it looked nothing like anything from Earth's history. The ceiling soared overhead, supported by what looked like living trees made of crystal. Light filtered down from above in patterns that shifted and danced across the floor, and there, at the far end of the vast space, stood the most magnificent being Tae-ho had ever seen. Queen Lyra was impossibly tall and graceful, her skin displaying deep purple patterns that seemed to pulse with power and authority. Her 4 arms moved in slow, deliberate gestures as she spoke with her advisors, and when she turned toward the human delegation, Tae-ho felt like he was looking at royalty from a fairy tale. "Remember the protocol," Park hissed under his breath as they approached. "Bow when I bow, don't make eye contact unless she speaks to you directly, and whatever you do, don't—" But Tae-ho was barely listening. He was too busy trying to take in everything around him, knowing that he was witnessing history in the making. Whatever happened next, humanity would never be the same. The words hit Tae-ho like a physical blow. He stood frozen, his hand still extended, watching as every single Veltharian in the massive throne room turned to stare at him. Their skin patterns had all shifted to the same brilliant golden color, pulsing in unison like synchronized heartbeats. The silence was so complete, he could hear his own blood rushing in his ears. Queen Lyra's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, those strange musical tones making his ribcage vibrate. "You offer the Talveth to me?" She repeated the question, but this time there was something different in her tone. Surprise, maybe even wonder. Ambassador Park looked like he was about to faint. The color had completely drained from his face, and his hands were shaking as he fumbled for his translation device. "What? What did he just do?" Park whispered, his voice barely audible. That's when Kixtal, the Veltharian translator, started speaking rapidly in heavily accented English. The small bird-like alien was practically vibrating with panic, his skin flashing through colors so quickly it was making Tae-Ho dizzy just watching him. Oh no, this is very bad," Kixtal chittered, his forearms waving frantically. "The human," he has made the Talveth gesture. This is the most sacred thing in all our culture. It is the offering of eternal bond between souls." Tae-Ho's mouth went dry. "I was just trying to help her. She stumbled and I—" No, you don't understand," Kixtal interrupted, his voice rising to an almost musical wail. "The Talveth is not simple help. It is promise of forever. When one offers the Talveth, they offer to share everything. Life, death, joy, sorrow, power, responsibility. Everything." The translator turned to Ambassador Park, his large eyes wide with fear. "Your human has just asked our queen to be his eternal life partner. Not marriage as you understand it, something much deeper. He has offered to share her very soul, to live as long as she lives, to rule beside her as equal." Park sank into the nearest chair, which thankfully the Veltharians had provided for the human delegation. "How long do we have to fix this?" "Fix?" Kixtal's skin flashed bright red. "There is no fix. The Talveth cannot be taken back once offered. It is sacred law, written in our oldest texts. If the queen accepts, the human becomes her bondmate forever. If she refuses—" The translator's voice dropped to a whisper. "Rejection of the Talveth is the worst insult possible in our culture. It means the one who offered it is considered worthless, beneath contempt." Tae-Ho felt his knees go weak. "What happens if she refuses?" "War," Kixtal said simply. "The last time someone rejected the Talveth, it started a conflict that lasted 300 years. The offering party considered it such a grave insult that they declared blood feud against the entire family line." The young soldier looked around the throne room, suddenly very aware that he was surrounded by hundreds of Veltharians, all watching him with those large, unblinking eyes. Some looked curious, others seemed excited, but more than a few appeared angry or concerned. "So let me get this straight," Tae-Ho said slowly, trying to keep his voice steady. "I accidentally proposed to an alien queen. If she says yes, I become co-ruler of a galactic empire. If she says no, Earth goes to war with a civilization that has ships the size of cities. That is accurate," Kixtal confirmed miserably. Ambassador Park buried his face in his hands. "My career is over. Hell, my life is probably over. Do you have any idea what this means for the peace negotiations, for humanity's future?" But Tae-Ho was looking at Queen Lyra, who had remained perfectly still throughout the entire exchange. Her skin patterns had stopped shifting and settled into deep, contemplative purples and blues. She was studying him with those ancient, intelligent eyes, and he could almost feel her weighing his worth. "Your Majesty," he said, his military training kicking in. "When in doubt, be direct and honest. I didn't know what that gesture meant in your culture. I was just trying to be helpful. But now that I understand what I've done, I want you to know that I meant it sincerely." A ripple of surprise went through the assembled Veltharians. Several of them began speaking in their musical language, their voices creating a complex harmony that filled the vast space. "You mean it?" Queen Lyra asked, stepping closer. "Even knowing what it entails?" Tae-Ho thought about his simple life as a soldier, about his family back home in Busan, about the quiet future he'd planned. Then he looked at this magnificent being who ruled over billions of souls across the stars. and he thought about the weight of responsibility that must rest on her shoulders every single day. Yes, Your Majesty, I mean it. The Queen's skin began to glow brighter, and for the first time since this whole mess started, Teho saw what might have been a smile cross her alien features. The moment those words left Teho's mouth, something changed in the air itself. Queen. Lyra's towering form seemed to grow even more imposing as she stepped closer, her forearms moving in slow, graceful arcs. Her skin patterns shifted from the deep purples to softer blues and greens, colors that somehow felt less threatening, more thoughtful. "You speak of standing beside me," she said, her musical voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity. "Do you truly understand what that means, young warrior?" Teho felt sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool air of the throne room. Every instinct told him to look away, to apologize and try to take back his words. But something else, maybe stubborn pride, maybe simple honesty, kept his eyes locked on hers. "Your Majesty, 3 hours ago I thought I was just here to look pretty in a uniform. Now I find out I've accidentally proposed marriage to the ruler of a galactic empire. So, no, I don't fully understand what any of this means, but I understand duty, and I understand keeping your word once you've given it." A sound rippled through the throne room, something between a gasp and a musical note. Queen Lyra raised one of her 4 hands, and instantly the hundreds of Veltharians who had been watching began to file out through various doorways. The sound of their footsteps was like gentle rain on leaves, soft and rhythmic. Within minutes, the vast space had emptied except for 4 beings. Teho and Ambassador Park stood on one side, while Queen Lyra was joined by another Veltharian who had been standing near the throne. This one was smaller than the Queen, but carried herself with obvious authority. Her skin showed patterns of deep red and gold that pulsed with what looked like barely contained emotion. "This is Prime Counselor Velthara," Queen Lyra said, gesturing to her companion. "She has served as my advisor for 60 of your Earth years. She knows me better than anyone in the Empire." Velthara stepped forward, her large eyes fixed on Teho with an intensity that made him want to take a step back. When she spoke, her voice was sharper than the Queen's, less musical, but somehow more urgent. "Human, you stand in the presence of a being who has ruled for over 2 centuries. She commands the loyalty of 12 billion souls across 400 worlds. She makes decisions that affect entire star systems. Do you comprehend the weight of what you offer to share?" Ambassador Park shifted nervously beside him, but Teho kept his attention focused on the 2 aliens before him. "Ma'am, with respect, I'm starting to get the picture. But here's what I know about leadership. It's not about being the smartest person in the room or having all the answers. It's about having people you can trust to watch your back and tell you the truth, even when it's hard to hear." Queen Lyra's patterns shifted again, this time to colors Teho had never seen before. Deep golds shot through with silver threads that seemed to move independently across her skin. "You speak of trust," she said softly. "Do you know how long? It has been since someone offered me something without wanting something in return. My advisors seek favor. My nobles seek power, my subjects seek protection. But you offered help to a stranger who stumbled." Velthara's skin flashed warning colors. "My queen, this is unprecedented. The nobility will resist. Many of our people have never even seen an alien, let alone accepted one as co-ruler. And this human," she gestured at Teho with 2 of her arms, "he knows nothing of our laws, our customs, our history. How can he help govern what he does not understand?" "That's a fair point," Teho admitted. "I don't know your laws or your history. I can't even pronounce most of your names properly. But I can learn, and sometimes an outsider's perspective helps you see problems in a new way." Queen Lyra moved, closer, close enough that Teho could see his reflection in her large dark eyes. "For 147 years, I have ruled alone. My people have pressured me to choose a bondmate, to secure the royal bloodline, to share the burden of leadership. But I have found no one I deemed worthy of the Talveth." She paused, one of her hands reaching out to hover just inches from Teho's face. "Yet here stands a being from another world, who offered the sacred bond without even knowing what it meant. No agenda, no ambition, no desire for power, just kindness." The silence stretched between them, filled with weight and possibility. Taeho could hear his own heartbeat, could smell the strange, sweet scent that seemed to follow the Veltharians, like flowers after rain. "The choice is mine to make," Queen Lyra said finally, her gaze never leaving his face. "But once made, it cannot be unmade. Are you prepared for that, Kim Taeho of Earth?" He thought of his family, his simple life, his small dreams. Then he looked at this magnificent being who carried the hopes and fears of billions on her shoulders. "Yes, Your Majesty, I am." The past 3 days had been the most intense of Taeho's life, while diplomats from both sides scrambled to arrange the most important ceremony in recent galactic history. He found himself crammed into crash courses on Veltharian culture, customs, and basic language. His head was spinning with information about proper hand positions, traditional greetings, and the 17 different ways to show respect to alien nobility. "Remember, when she extends her lower arms, you mirror with both of yours," instructed Dr. Lee, the cultural specialist who had been flown in from Seoul University. "And whatever you do, don't flinch when the sharing begins. The Veltharians consider any sign of rejection during the Talveth to be deeply insulting." Taeho nodded, trying to absorb yet another crucial detail. Meanwhile, Queen Lyra was apparently doing her own homework, studying human customs and traditions through her advisors. He'd been told she was particularly fascinated by Korean family structures and the concept of filial duty. The ceremony was being held in the main assembly hall of the neutral space station where the peace talks had started. The room had been transformed into something that looked like a fusion of a Korean wedding hall and an alien cathedral. Soft earth music played alongside Veltharian harmonies, creating an otherworldly soundtrack that somehow worked perfectly together. Representatives from dozens of worlds had gathered to witness the historic moment. Taeho could see human dignitaries sitting alongside beings he couldn't even begin to identify. Some with multiple eyes, others with crystalline skin, a few that looked like they were made of living liquid. The diversity was overwhelming, but also strangely comforting. If all these different species could coexist peacefully, maybe his union with Queen Lyra wasn't so impossible after all. When the moment finally arrived, Taeho walked to the center of the hall wearing his finest dress uniform, the one reserved for the most formal military occasions. Every ribbon, every button, every crease was perfect. He'd spent an hour that morning making sure everything was exactly right. Queen Lyra approached from the opposite side, and Taeho's breath caught in his throat. She wore robes that seemed to be made of liquid starlight, flowing and shifting with every step. The fabric, if it could be called fabric, responded to her emotions, currently showing patterns of nervous anticipation mixed with hope. Colors rippled across the material like aurora across a night sky. "You look beautiful," he said softly as she reached him, the words coming out in the basic Veltharian he'd been frantically learning. Her skin patterns brightened with what he'd learned was pleasure and surprise. "You honor me with your effort to speak our language," she replied in careful Korean, her accent making the familiar words sound like music. The ceremony itself was surprisingly simple. No grand speeches, no elaborate rituals, just two beings making a choice that would change both their lives forever. When Queen Lyra slowly extended her forearms toward him, Taeho felt his heart racing. This was it, the moment of no return. He placed his two hands in hers, palm to palm, and immediately felt warmth spreading up his arms. At first it was pleasant, like sinking into a hot bath after a long day. But then something deeper began to happen. The world around him seemed to fade away, replaced by flashes of images and sensations that weren't his own. He saw the Veltharian homeworld as a young queen Lyra had first seen it, felt her wonder at the responsibility thrust upon her at such a young age. He experienced her loneliness during long nights in the palace, making decisions that affected millions, while having no one to truly share her burdens with. He felt her hopes for peace between their peoples, her genuine desire to find common ground with humanity. And underneath it all, a deep, aching loneliness that had lasted for over a century. In return, his own memories flowed into her consciousness. His childhood in Busan, playing soccer with his friends in the narrow streets near the harbor, the pride in his parents' eyes when he graduated from military academy, his wonder the first time he saw Earth from space, that tiny blue marble that contained everything he'd ever known and loved. She experienced his dreams of exploration, his fascination with the stars, and his simple but profound belief that different people could work together if they just tried to understand each other. She felt his nervous excitement about this new life, mixed with homesickness for the world he was leaving behind. The sharing lasted only moments, but it felt like hours. When it finally ended, Tae-ho found himself looking at Queen Lyra with completely new eyes. She wasn't just an alien ruler anymore. She was someone he understood on a level deeper than words, and from the way her skin patterns had shifted to warm, golden hues, he could tell she felt the same way about him. "I can feel your thoughts," she whispered in wonder, her voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in his mind. "And I can feel yours," he replied, amazed to discover that he somehow understood her emotional patterns as clearly as if they were his own facial expressions. Around them, the assembled witnesses erupted in celebration, humans cheering, Veltharians, creating musical tones that filled the air with joy, and the various alien species adding their own forms of approval. But Tae-ho barely noticed any of it. He was too busy marveling at the incredible connection he now shared with the most powerful being in the known galaxy. The observation deck had become Tae-ho's favorite place on the massive royal flagship. For the past 2 months, he'd found himself drawn here whenever the weight of his new reality became too much to handle. Today was no different, except this time he was watching his home planet disappear into the black void of space, possibly forever. Earth looked so small from this distance. Just a tiny blue marble floating in the darkness, holding everything and everyone he'd ever known. His parents were down there, probably watching the news coverage of their son's impossible journey. His old unit was still stationed at the DMZ, carrying on without him. His favorite noodle shop in Busan was serving customers who had no idea that one of their regulars was now traveling to another world to become an alien co-ruler. "You're thinking about home," Queen Lyra said softly as she approached. Over the past 2 months, their bond had grown stronger, allowing them to sense each other's emotions even when they were apart. Right now, he could feel her trying to offer comfort while dealing with her own anxieties about returning to Ethros. "Is it that obvious?" Tae-ho asked, managing a weak smile. Her skin patterns had shifted to match his mood, deep blues and greys that reflected his mixture of sadness and uncertainty. It still amazed him how their emotional states had become so intertwined. "I felt the same way the first time I left Athros as a young queen," she admitted, moving to stand beside him at the massive window. "The universe suddenly seemed so vast and lonely. But home isn't just a place, Tae-ho. Home is where you're understood, where you belong. I hope you'll find that Ethros can become home for you too." Through their bond, he could sense that she was more nervous about this homecoming than she was letting on. 2 months of traveling together had taught him to read the subtle shifts in her emotional patterns. Right now, underneath her calm exterior, she was genuinely worried about how her people would receive him. "Tell me about it," he said, partly to distract himself from his homesickness, and partly because he could feel her need to talk through her concerns. "What should I expect?" Queen Lyra's patterns shifted to warmer colors as she began describing her world. "Athros is unlike anything you've seen. Our cities aren't built, they're grown. We cultivate crystal formations that live and breathe, expanding and changing as our populations grow. The buildings sing in harmony with the wind, and at night, they glow with the collective emotions of everyone inside them." As she spoke, Tae-ho could see flashes of the world through their shared bond. Towering spires that twisted toward the sky like frozen tornadoes, their surfaces shifting through every color imaginable. Bridges made of pure energy that sparkled and danced as people crossed them. Gardens where the plants themselves were conscious, responding to the moods and needs of those who tended them. "It sounds incredible," he said honestly. "But you're worried about something. I can feel it." Her patterns dimmed slightly. "Not all of my people are happy about our bonding. The noble houses are divided. Some see you as a gift from the cosmos, proof that our empire is destined to expand beyond our own species. Others view you as an outsider who threatens our ancient traditions. Tejo had expected this. The past 2 months hadn't been without their challenges. Even on the ship, some of the crew members had been cool toward him, not openly hostile, but distant. He'd caught them whispering in their musical language when they thought he wasn't listening and he didn't need to understand the words to know they were talking about him. Prime Minister Kethvar is leading the opposition, Queen Lyra continued. He's a traditionalist who believes that only pure Veltharian blood should sit on the throne. He's been building support among the conservative houses, arguing that our bonding was a mistake that could weaken the empire. What's his main argument? Tejo asked, though he suspected he already knew. That you're too inexperienced to help rule. That human lifespans are too short to provide stable leadership. That your people's violent tendencies could corrupt our peaceful society. She paused, her patterns flickering with frustration. Some of it's just prejudice, but some of it might be valid concern. Tejo turned away from the window to face her fully. Lyra, I'm not going to pretend I'm qualified to help run a galactic empire. 2 months ago, my biggest responsibility was making sure my squad's equipment was clean and their paperwork was filed on time. But I didn't ask for this position. I stumbled into it, literally. And now that I'm here, I'm going to do everything I can to prove that their faith in the Talveth wasn't misplaced. Her skin brightened with what he'd learned. Was affection mixed with admiration. That's exactly why the Bond chose you. Not because you sought power, but because you're willing to serve despite your doubts. A soft chime echoed through the observation deck, followed by an announcement in the Veltharian language. Queen Lyra's patterns shifted to excited gold as, she translated, "We're approaching the outer system. Would you like to see your new home?" Tejo took a deep breath, feeling the mix of anticipation and terror that had become his constant companion. "Show me." The ship's massive screens flickered to life, displaying a view that made Tejo's breath catch in his throat. Ethros hung before them like a jewel, its surface swirling with colors that shifted and danced in patterns too complex to follow. Even from this distance, he could see the crystal cities jutting up from the continents like magnificent sculptures, connected by threads of light that pulsed with life and energy. "Welcome home," Queen Lyra said softly, taking his hand in 2 of hers. Home. The word felt strange, but as he watched the beautiful world growing larger on the screen, Tejo found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, he could learn to belong here. The emergency alarm woke Tejo from a restless sleep at 3 a.m. Ethros time. The piercing sound echoed through the crystal corridors of the royal palace, followed immediately by the urgent voice of the Night Watch commander speaking in rapid Veltharian. Even with his growing understanding of the language, Tejo could only catch fragments. Collapse when miners, emergency response. Queen Lyra was already sitting up in bed, her skin patterns cycling through deep reds and oranges that he'd learned meant extreme concern. Through their bond, he could feel her, shock and fear, emotions so strong they made his own heart race. "What's happening?" he asked, already reaching for his clothes. "Mining disaster on Vexistara," she said, her voice tight with worry. "The reports are still coming in, but it sounds catastrophic. We need to get to the emergency command center immediately." Within minutes, they were hurrying through the palace corridors toward the crisis management center. The halls were filled with rushing staff members, their skin patterns all showing various shades of alarm and urgency. The command center itself was a massive circular room, with holographic displays showing real-time data from across the Empire. Tonight, all the screens were focused on one location, the Vextara mining colony. "Give me the full report, Queen," Lyra commanded as they entered. Emergency Coordinator Zixara stepped forward, her normally calm demeanor replaced by barely controlled panic. "Your Majesty, at 0247 local time, the main mining complex on Vextara experienced a massive seismic event. The preliminary data suggests a deep underground fault line shifted, causing multiple levels of the mine to collapse simultaneously. The holographic display showed a 3-dimensional model of the mining complex, a vast network of tunnels and chambers that extended deep into the planet's crust. Nearly half of the structure was now marked in red, indicating collapsed or damaged sections. "How many people are trapped?" Taeho asked, studying the display with growing horror. Over 2,000 miners were on shift when the collapse occurred, Zixara replied. We've managed to evacuate the upper levels, but approximately 1,800 workers are still trapped in the lower sections. Some have been in contact via emergency communications, but many sections have gone completely dark. Queen Lyra's skin patterns shifted to deeper shades of red. What's the status of our rescue operations? Standard Protocol 7 is already in effect, came a new voice from across the room. Prime Minister Kethvar had arrived, flanked by several senior ministers. His skin showed the controlled patterns of someone trying to maintain authority during a crisis. Our emergency teams are conducting detailed structural analysis before beginning extraction operations. Safety must be our primary concern. Taeho pulled up the rescue timeline on his personal display, and his heart sank. According to this, it'll take at least 60 hours just to complete the safety assessment. Then another 48 hours to establish secure access routes. That's over 4 days before we even start pulling people out. That is the established protocol, Kethvar replied stiffly. It has served us well for centuries. We cannot risk making the situation worse with hasty actions. Hasty? Taeho couldn't keep the frustration out of his voice. People are dying down there right now. Every minute we waste on paperwork and safety protocols is another minute those miners are running out of air, dealing with injuries or freezing to death. Through their bond, he could feel Queen Lyra's internal struggle. She understood both perspectives, the need for caution and the urgency of the situation, but she was also feeling something else, a growing respect for Taeho's instincts, even as she worried about the political implications of going against established procedures. What would you suggest? She asked quietly. Taeho moved to the holographic display, pointing to several locations. We don't need to secure the entire mine, just establish direct access routes to the trapped sections. Use smaller, more agile teams that can move quickly through unstable areas. Focus on getting people out first. Worry about long-term structural integrity later. Absolutely not. Kethvar's skin flashed angry red patterns. You're talking about sending rescue teams into areas that could collapse at any moment. One wrong move and we could lose hundreds of rescuers along with the trapped miners. And if we wait 4 days, we'll lose the miners anyway, Taeho shot back. I've seen this before. Not in mines, but in collapsed buildings after earthquakes. The first 24 hours are critical. After that, survival rates drop dramatically. The room fell silent, except for the soft humming of the holographic displays. Everyone was looking between Taeho and Kethvar, waiting to see who Queen Lyra would support. The political implications were enormous. Siding with her human bondmate over established Veltharian protocols would send shockwaves through the government. Here's exactly what I warned about, Kethvar said, his voice carrying the weight of righteous conviction. The human thinks like a warrior, charging into danger without considering the consequences. This is not a battlefield. It's a delicate rescue. Operation that requires patience and careful planning. Sometimes patience kills people, Taeho replied, meeting the Prime Minister's gaze steadily. I'm not talking about charging in blindly. I'm talking about accepting calculated risks to save lives. That's what leadership means. Making hard choices when there's no perfect solution. Queen Lyra stood in the center of the room, her skin patterns cycling through colors that reflected her internal turmoil. Through their bond, Taeho could feel her weighing the options, considering not just the immediate crisis, but the long-term political ramifications of her decision. Finally, she spoke. Prepare both plans, traditional protocols and the rapid response option. I want to see detailed projections for both approaches within the hour. It wasn't a decision yet, but Taeho could feel her leaning toward action. The question was whether she'd have the courage to go against centuries of tradition to save lives, and whether he'd be able to live with the consequences if his plan failed. The rescue operation at Vextara had been a complete success. All 1,800 trapped miners were pulled from the wreckage within 36 hours, with only minor injuries reported. The rapid response plan that Taeho had pushed for had worked perfectly, and news feeds across the empire showed footage of grateful families reuniting with their loved ones. For a brief moment, Teho had allowed himself to believe that maybe he was starting to prove himself worthy of his unexpected role. That illusion shattered exactly 1 week later. "Turn on the public broadcast channel," Queen Lyra said grimly, as she entered their private chambers. Her skin patterns were showing the deep purples and greys that he'd learned meant serious political trouble. The holographic display flickered to life, showing what appeared to be some kind of formal government session. The chamber was filled with Veltharians in elaborate robes, their skin patterns creating a dizzying array of colors that shifted and pulsed as they spoke. At the center of it all stood a tall, imposing figure that Teho didn't recognize. "That's Lady Yunsu," Queen Lyra explained, settling beside him with obvious tension in her posture. "She's the primary spokesperson for Noble House Zarveth. They're one of the oldest and most influential families in the Empire." Lady Yunsu was speaking in formal Veltharian, her voice carrying the musical tones that indicated she was addressing the assembly in an official capacity. Teho's understanding of the language had improved dramatically over the past few months, but the formal political dialect was still challenging for him to follow. "What is she saying?" he asked. Queen Lyra's patterns darkened further. "She's formally challenging your right to rule. House Zarveth is invoking an ancient law that allows noble houses to question the fitness of royal bondmates." The camera angle shifted, and Teho could see the entire assembly chamber. Hundreds of Veltharian nobles filled the seats, and their skin patterns told a disturbing story. While some showed neutral colors, a significant portion displayed the reds and oranges that indicated support for the challenge. "The Talveth is indeed sacred," Lady Yunsu was saying, her voice now being translated by the broadcast system. "We do not question the Queen's right to choose her bondmate, nor do we dispute the spiritual significance of their union. However, the sacred bond of souls does not automatically grant the wisdom and experience necessary to govern 12 billion citizens across 400 worlds." Teho felt his stomach drop. Through their bond, he could sense Queen Lyra's mixture of anger and worry. This wasn't just political theater, it was a real threat to their authority. One successful rescue operation, while admirable, does not qualify someone to make decisions that affect the lives of entire star systems, Lady Yunsu continued. "The human co-ruler has never governed so much as a single city. He has no experience with interstellar economics, no understanding of the complex relationships between our member worlds, no knowledge of the delicate balance that maintains peace across our diverse empire." The words hit Teho like physical blows because he knew they were absolutely true. Every criticism Lady Yunsu raised was valid. He was a soldier who had stumbled into a role he was completely unprepared for. The mine rescue had been a matter of military tactics and quick thinking, hardly the same as managing the complex political and economic needs of a galactic empire. "How many nobles support her position?" he asked quietly. "Too many," Queen Lyra admitted. "House Zarveth has been building this coalition for weeks. They're not just questioning your qualifications, they're questioning my judgment in accepting the Talveth." On the screen, Lady Yunsu was presenting what appeared to be a formal petition. "We therefore request that the Royal Council convene to establish specific qualifications and testing procedures for co-rulers who come from outside our traditional governance structure. The human may remain as the Queen's bondmate, but his authority to make imperial decisions should be limited until he can demonstrate genuine competence in statecraft." Teho stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the crystal gardens of the palace. The beautiful alien landscape that had begun to feel like home now seemed to mock him. Who was he kidding? He was a kid from Busan who had accidentally proposed to an alien queen. The idea that he could help rule a star-spanning civilization was absurd. "They're right, you know," he said, not turning around. "I have no idea what I'm doing. Every day I sit in those council meetings, listening to discussions about trade agreements and territorial disputes and diplomatic protocols, and I feel like a complete fraud." Through their bond, he felt Queen Lyra's surge of protective anger, but also her underlying worry. She knew he was struggling with the role, had felt his doubts and insecurities every day since their bonding. "The Talveth doesn't make mistakes," she said firmly, moving to stand beside him. "It chose you for reasons that go beyond political experience. But what if it did make a mistake? Tejo asked, finally voicing the fear that had been growing inside him for weeks. What if I'm going to drag you down with me? What if trying to defend my position weakens your ability to lead your people? On the broadcast, the debate was continuing, with various nobles standing to voice their support or opposition to House Zarveth's challenge. The empire that had seemed so unified during their bonding ceremony now appeared to be splitting apart over the question of his worthiness. Lady Yun-Su is calling for a formal competency evaluation, Queen Lyra translated as another speech began. They want to test your knowledge of imperial law, economic policy, and diplomatic protocol. If you fail, they'll demand that your authority be revoked. Tejo closed his eyes, feeling the weight of billions of lives pressing down on him. The scared young soldier who had just wanted to help someone who stumbled now had to prove he deserved to help lead one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. When do they want to hold this evaluation? He asked. 2 weeks from today, in front of the full Imperial Council, broadcast live across all member worlds. 2 weeks to prove he belonged in a role he'd never wanted, to people who had every reason to doubt him. Tejo took a deep breath, drawing on the same determination that had gotten him through military training. Then I guess I'd better start studying. The war room fell silent as the final casualty reports came in from the Korthani attack. 3 border colonies completely overrun, 2 major defensive stations destroyed, nearly 50,000 Veltharian civilians dead or missing. The holographic display showed angry red markers spreading across what had been peaceful space just 6 hours ago. Tejo stared at the tactical overview, his mind struggling to process the scale of the disaster. He'd been preparing for Lady Yun-Su's competency evaluation, buried in books about trade law and diplomatic protocols, when the emergency alarms started screaming. Now he found himself in the middle of the Empire's first major war in over 2 centuries. How did they get so close without being detected? Queen Lyra asked, her skin patterns cycling through colors that Tejo had never seen before. Deep, angry reds mixed with flashes of what looked like panic. Admiral Thisara, a veteran commander whose scarred skin told the story of decades of military service, stepped forward to the main display. The Korthani used some kind of new stealth technology, Your Majesty. Our early warning systems detected nothing until their ships were already in attack formation. By then, it was too late to mount an effective defense. The Admiral manipulated the holographic controls, showing the current positions of both fleets. The Korthani forces were massive, easily 3 times the size of the Veltharian border patrol that had been caught off guard. Worse, they were already establishing defensive positions around the captured colonies, making any counterattack extremely costly. What are our options? Tejo asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer from the grim expressions around the room. Standard military doctrine calls for strategic withdrawal, Admiral Thisara replied, her patterns showing the controlled calm of a professional soldier delivering bad news. We pull our remaining forces back to the Zeta defensive line, consolidate our strength, and prepare for a prolonged campaign. The Korthani have superior numbers, but our technology and defensive positions should allow us to gradually wear them down over time. How long would that take? Queen Lyra asked. Best case scenario? 2 to 3 years. More realistically, we're looking at a decade-long conflict. Tejo felt his heart sink. Through their bond, he could sense Queen Lyra's horror at the prospect. A decade of war would devastate both civilizations, cost millions of lives, and potentially destabilize the entire region of space. What about the civilians still trapped in the occupied territories? He asked. The Admiral's patterns dimmed. Standard. Protocol is to consider them lost. Any rescue attempt would require us to engage the Korthani fleet directly, which would result in unacceptable casualties for our forces. Unacceptable to who? The words came out sharper than Tejo had intended, drawing surprised looks from everyone in the room. Those are our people out there. We can't just abandon them. Co-ruler Tejo, Admiral Thisara said with barely concealed irritation, I understand your emotional response, but military strategy cannot be based on sentiment. We must think strategically about the long-term survival of the Empire. But Tejo was studying the tactical display with new eyes, drawing on his military training to see patterns that the Veltharian commanders might be missing. What if we don't play by their rules? What if instead of falling back to defensive positions, we hit them where they don't expect it? Explain, Queen Lyra said, her patterns shifting to the focused blue that meant she was giving him her complete attention. Teho moved to the holographic controls, highlighting several positions on the map. The Kothani are expecting us to retreat and dig in. That's what Veltharian military doctrine has always done. Fight defensive wars, grind down enemies through superior technology and patience. But they've spread their forces thin to occupy these colonies. Look at their supply lines. He traced the enemy logistics routes with his finger. They're stretched across 3 star systems, with their main fleet protecting the captured territories. But they're vulnerable here, here, and here. He marked several points along the enemy supply chain. Small, fast strike forces could cripple their ability to maintain the occupation. Admiral Trisara's skin flashed dismissive patterns. You're talking about hit-and-run tactics, guerrilla warfare. That's not how civilized militaries conduct operations, co-ruler. We fight with honor, not through raids and ambushes. Honor doesn't save lives, Teho replied, his frustration growing. And right now, every hour we waste on civilized warfare is another hour that those trapped civilians are suffering under enemy occupation. The room erupted in musical arguments as various military advisors began debating the merits of Teho's proposal. Some supported the idea of unconventional tactics, while others insisted that abandoning traditional Veltharian military doctrine would be a betrayal of their cultural values. Through it all, Teho could feel Queen Lyra's internal struggle through their bond. She was torn between her trust in his judgment and the weight of centuries of military tradition. He could also sense something else, the political implications of this decision. If his strategy failed, it wouldn't just be a military disaster. It would be proof that Lady Yunsu and the other critics were right about his lack of qualifications. The decision is mine to make, Queen Lyra said finally, her voice cutting through the debate. But I want to hear all options. Admiral Thisara, prepare your strategic withdrawal plan. Co-ruler Teho, I want detailed projections for your strike force strategy. We'll reconvene in 2 hours to make our final decision. As the room began to empty, Teho remained at the tactical display, studying the enemy positions and trying to work out the details of his plan. The weight of responsibility felt crushing. Thousands of lives hung in the balance, and everyone in the Empire would be watching to see if the human who had accidentally become co-ruler could actually help win a war. Through their bond, he felt Queen Lyra's hand on his shoulder before she actually touched him. You're thinking about more than just military tactics, she observed. I'm thinking about what happens if I'm wrong, he admitted. If this fails, it won't just be a defeat. It'll be proof that I never belonged here in the first place. Queen Lyra's patterns shifted to warm, supportive colors. The Talveth chose you for a reason, Teho. Trust in that, even if you can't trust in yourself yet. The strike force launched at dawn, Ethros time. Teho stood in the command center, watching dozens of small, fast ships disappear into hyperspace, each one carrying a mixed crew of human tactical specialists and Veltharian technical experts. His heart was pounding so hard, he was sure everyone in the room could hear it. First wave should reach the Kothani supply depot in 6 hours, reported Captain Kim Min-jae, one of the human officers who had volunteered for the mission. His voice crackled through the communications array, steady and professional despite the danger ahead. Queen Lyra stood beside Teho, her skin patterns cycling through anxious blues and greens. Through their bond, he could feel her trying to project confidence, while battling her own fears about the unconventional strategy. Around them, Veltharian military officials watched the displays, with expressions ranging from hopeful to deeply skeptical. Admiral Thisara had made her disapproval clear. If this fails, she had said before the launch, we'll have thrown away our best chance for a coordinated defense. The Kothani will expect us to try something like this again. But Teho had spent weeks working with both human and Veltharian strategists to refine the plan. Instead of massive fleet engagements, they would use small coordinated strikes to cripple the enemy's supply lines and communication networks. Hit hard, hit fast, and disappear before the Kothani could mount a proper response. The first reports came in exactly 6 hours later. Supply depot at coordinates 7-7 Alpha has been neutralized, Captain Kim's voice announced to the command center. No enemy casualties, but their fuel reserves for the next 3 months are gone. Proceeding to secondary target. Taeho allowed himself a small smile. The plan wasn't just about military victory. It was about showing that humans and Veltharians could fight together without losing their essential nature. The Veltharian crews handled the advanced technology and defensive systems, while human tactical thinking provided the flexibility and unpredictability that caught their enemies off guard. Over the next 2 weeks, the results exceeded everyone's expectations. Korthani communication relays went dark across 3 star systems. Their supply convoys found themselves under constant harassment from enemies they couldn't pin down long enough to fight. Most importantly, the civilian populations in the occupied territories began reporting that their captors were growing increasingly frustrated and disorganized. "They're withdrawing from the outer colonies," Queen Lyra announced during one of the daily briefings, her skin showing the bright golds that indicated excitement and hope. "Our intelligence sources report that Korthani commanders are arguing among themselves about how to respond to our tactics." The breakthrough came when Strike Team Delta, led by Commander Park So-young and Veltharian navigator Velkara, managed to infiltrate the enemy's main command station. Instead of destroying it, they uploaded a virus that caused the Korthani fleet's coordination systems to malfunction at a critical moment. "Their entire battle formation is collapsing," Admiral Thaisara reported, her own skepticism replaced by genuine admiration. "Without proper coordination, they can't maintain their defensive positions around the occupied worlds." The final assault was swift and decisive. Veltharian ships equipped with human-designed tactical software broke through enemy lines that had seemed impregnable just days before. The Korthani forces, demoralized and confused by weeks of unconventional warfare, surrendered or retreated with minimal resistance. When the last enemy ship disappeared into hyperspace, the command center erupted in celebration. Taeho found himself surrounded by cheering Veltharians, whose skin patterns blazed with joy and relief. But more than that, he noticed something that made his chest tighten with emotion. Many of them were looking at him with genuine respect, not just the polite deference they'd shown before. "The human strategy worked," Admiral Thaisara said, approaching him with her skin showing patterns he'd learned meant formal acknowledgement. "I owe you an apology, co-ruler Taeho. Your unconventional thinking saved thousands of lives and ended this war in weeks instead of years." The real moment of vindication came that evening during the victory celebration in the Great Hall of the Palace. Representatives from across the Empire had gathered to honor the successful campaign, and Taeho stood on the main platform beside Queen Lyra, still hardly believing what they had accomplished. But it was what happened next that truly changed everything. As Queen Lyra began her formal address to the assembled crowd, something extraordinary occurred. The skin patterns of every Veltharian in the vast hall began to synchronize, pulsing in perfect unison with deep, harmonious colors that seemed to resonate through the crystal architecture itself. "I've never seen anything like this," Queen Lyra whispered to him, her own patterns joining the synchronized display. Through their bond, he could feel her amazement. "This level of unity, it hasn't happened in over 3 centuries." Lady Yun-Su, who had led the opposition to his rule, approached the platform. Her skin showed the formal patterns of someone making an official declaration. "Co-ruler Taeho," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "House Zarveth formally withdraws its challenge to your authority. You have proven that leadership comes not from bloodline or tradition alone, but from the courage to see what others cannot, and the wisdom to act upon it." Prime Minister Kethvar followed, his own patterns showing deep respect. "The Talveth. Chose wisely. You have shown us that our empire's strength lies not in our purity, but in our ability to learn and grow. The fusion of human and Veltharian capabilities has created something neither could achieve alone." As the celebration continued around them, Taeho felt a profound sense of belonging that went beyond anything he'd experienced before. He was no longer the soldier who had accidentally made a sacred gesture. He had become exactly what both civilizations needed: proof that different peoples could not only coexist, but could create something beautiful and powerful together. Through their bond, Queen Lyra shared his joy and added her own deep satisfaction. The scared young queen who had ruled alone for so long now had a true partner, and together they had shown the galaxy what was possible when understanding replaced fear. The war was over, but more importantly, a new chapter had begun for both their peoples